And I'm very delighted to introduce our speaker. Today, we are joined by Pablo Sinovas, who is the country director for Fauna and Flora in Cambodia and is also a National Geographic Explorer. Over the last 6 years, he spent a focused period of time working with the topic that he will be telling you about today, both through research and conservation efforts. So thank you so much for joining us today, Pablo, especially from Sumatra, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jeff, very much for the kind introduction, and thank you to the Linnean Society of London for inviting me for this talk. So I'm going to tell you today a story about crocodiles. There's only a couple of videos in existence about the Siamese crocodile swimming out in the wild. I will show you one of those videos at the end of the presentation. But this presentation is not only about crocodiles. It is also a story of optimism in the face of one of humanity's biggest crises. And in this story, these are some of the protagonists, these people and these baskets, and I'll explain why. But first, what is the problem? What is the crisis? So wildlife populations globally have declined by 73% in the past 50 years, or in 50 years up to 2020. That's an incredibly alarming figure. When we look at freshwater populations, this is actually worse. They have declined by 85% over that period of time. Now, habitats around the globe are shrinking, and this is the result primarily agricultural and urban expansion. So we are transforming forests and other natural habitats into agricultural fields and cities. What's also happening at the same time is extinction rates are currently 100 times higher than the estimated background, and they are also accelerating. So here on the right, you see just a few images of species that are categorized as extinct or extinct in the wild on the IUCN Red List. There is over 1,000 in the IUCN Red List with those categories, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, because there will be many species that are going extinct on a daily basis before they are even described. And if there is a biodiversity crisis, our health and our livelihoods are also at risk. And there is very solid evidence for this. We have all the warnings out there. These are just a few examples on screen from some of the kind of largest media outlets out there. We have been warned by scientists. We have been warned by the media. We know we have a really big problem in our hands when biodiversity is declining as it is, combined with the climate crisis. This is affecting our health. It is affecting the economy, and the consequences could be and will be devastating unless we do something about it. So literally, the future of our children and our livelihoods are at stake here. So it's clear we have a problem, but also, unfortunately, we are struggling to address this problem. And this is something that, again, is often in the news. Now, what I am here to tell you today is we actually can retain habitats, and we can avert extinctions. And we can do this with local people, and we can do this for the benefit of nature and of people at the same time. It is possible. And I'll show you how, through an example from Cambodia. Of course, we need scaled up solutions, but this is just an example of conservation in action that is working. So going back to the baskets that I showed you at the beginning, these baskets are in Cambodia. And so let's situate ourselves. We have a map of Southeast Asia here, and Cambodia is Can you still see me? Yeah. Cambodia is just there. So if we zoom in to the country, we see in the southwest, there's a rather large expanse of forest. This is the Cardamom Mountains, over 2 million hectares of tropical forest. And if we zoom in, this is a pretty good forest, jungle that is remote. And in that jungle, there is some rivers. And in some of those rivers, there is a very rare creature. But exactly how rare is this creature? Well, this is a photograph I took at the Cambridge University Museum of Zoology. And as you can see, it is a display of a Siamese crocodile with its original label. And the label says, this species is now thought to be extinct in the wild. Little was known of its biology, etc., etc. So, towards the end of last century, this species was indeed thought to be extinct in the wild. And this is an extract from an action plan for the conservation of crocodiles from 1992. That report said the only known wild population was located in Bung Borapet Reservoir in Thailand. However, no recent sightings of crocodiles have been made at this site. It also said there was no adequate survey data available from any part of the Siamese crocodile's range, and no active conservation or management programs are underway. So a pretty grim picture back then. In the year 2000, however, there was an expedition led by the conservation NGO I work for, Fauna Flora, together with Cambodian government officials and local communities in the Cardamom Mountains. This was a time when Cambodia was just coming out of a really deep internal crisis, the Khmer Rouge civil war, very remote area, very difficult to access. So this was a truly daring expedition back then. And it found a huge amount of new species, but also one of the most interesting discoveries was that the Siamese crocodile was still present in some of those rivers, even though it had been considered extinct by scientists. It was not extinct in the wild, fortunately. The species is still considered critically endangered. There is very few of them in the world. Cambodia remains, the Cardamom Mountains are still a stronghold for the species, but since then there have been a few additional very small populations found elsewhere in Southeast Asia, mostly Laos, very small population in Thailand and some in Indonesia and Borneo. Now, the challenge that led to the near extinction of the Siamese crocodile was partly habitat destruction, but also demand for the skins, for the leather trade. Now, that demand for the leather, for the Siamese crocodile in particular, has diminished. It's not a major threat right now, but habitat destruction continues to be a very important threat for the species. And this is an image from the Siamese crocodile habitat in the Cardamom Mountains jungle. Now, one of the positive sides of this story is that local communities, the indigenous Chon people of the area, consider the species to be sacred. They believe that if the species is harmed, then bad luck will come to the village or to the families. This is an inscription from Angkor Wat, and you can see that crocodiles have had cultural importance in Khmer culture for a long time. So we've leveraged that, and we've worked very closely. We continue to work very closely with local communities from the area, with indigenous communities from the Cardamom Mountains, to patrol the remaining habitat of the Siamese crocodile. And these local communities are engaged in the monitoring of the species, in protection of those important rivers, and so it keeps them engaged. We are also providing sustainable livelihood support to those communities in the area. And so it is currently a project that is benefiting the species, but also keeping those local communities engaged. One of the activities that these local community patrols do together with our team is nest monitoring. They go out there and look for nests of crocodiles. So crocodiles build mound nests. It's like little hills of vegetation, basically, and they lay their eggs deep inside that vegetation. So with the rotting of that matter, there is good temperature for incubation and stable temperature. Now, these nests are very difficult to find, but our team is really good at finding them. Now, the problem is, actually, they don't find very many, and that's because there is not many out there in the wild. This is a very important problem for the species. It's not really reproducing very much. And here you can see how many nests have been found over the past couple of decades. And as you can see, this ranges from 0 to 5. We've got more nests found in recent years, which is very encouraging, but still, this is not very many. The species is unlikely to bounce back unless we give it a helping hand. And so that's what we're doing. We have set up a conservation breeding center just an hour outside of Cambodia's capital of Phnom Penh. And so these are some breeding pools for hatchlings. Here we keep the hatchlings when they come out of the egg until they are big enough to move on to the next enclosure. But we had a problem at the breeding center, and that was the facilities are great, but we didn't have enough breeding adults. We literally just had a couple of breeding age males, and so we were not able to produce many hatchlings at all, which we then could raise to reintroduce back into the wild so that we could boost those populations and increase natural breeding. And so what to do in that situation? Well, there's actually lots of crocodiles in Cambodia, but they are in farms, in commercial farms. And these farms have been directly responsible for the near demise of the species. But can they now give something back to conservation? So we approached some of these farms, and there were a couple of farmers who were willing to donate crocodiles for the breeding and release program. Now, that's when we encounter the next challenge, which is many of these crocodiles are actually not Siamese crocodiles. They are hybrids. They are hybrids between Siamese crocodiles and sometimes saltwater crocodiles, sometimes Cuban crocodiles. Sometimes it could be a combination of those. And obviously, we can't be releasing hybrid crocodiles into the wild. And so how do we tell them apart? It can be very difficult visually, in fact, nearly impossible. We didn't have the capacity in country to undertake genetic testing, and exporting samples was really quite difficult bureaucratically. So we worked with the Royal University of Phnom Penh with technical support from the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, and we set up a lab in Cambodia able to carry out DNA testing of crocodiles to tell whether they were purebred Siamese crocodiles or not. That was a huge milestone. And as a result of that, so you can see here the number of adult crocodiles that we had in the breeding facility up until 2020, when we started this process of seeking out additional breeding adults from farms and doing DNA testing. And as you can see, we've been able to very significantly increase that number. Now we have a sufficient number of adult males and females to produce enough hatchlings for our reintroduction ambitions, or reinforcement ambitions, in fact, in the wild. here we can see the result of that, the very beginning of that result. So up to 2021, again, these were the number of hatchlings produced at the breeding facility, not very many, and also up and down, and that's because we were kind of refining the way in which we breed the species in captivity here in Cambodia. Again, in recent years, we have seen a very important increase in those numbers, which I expect will continue to grow. I expect in the coming years we will be producing potentially hundreds of crocodiles every year instead of tens of crocodiles. Now, our next challenge was, now we have crocodiles for release, but the release sites are very, very remote in a landscape that is mountains and forest, the size of Belgium, approximately. Now, how do we get 50 crocodiles to that place over there? So that's where the baskets come in again. These baskets, which are traditionally used for fishing and other purposes in Cambodia, are perfect to keep crocodiles safe and cool during a journey. They come in different sizes as well, and so they are really handy. Crocodiles are quite comfortable there for the duration of the journey, which we try to minimize. And the journey itself is very interesting. We take the crocodiles by car up to the point where there's roads, and then we then load those baskets with the crocodiles into mopeds and carry them through the jungle. There is some trails and sometimes not even trails. The mopeds go even across rivers. This often involves us having to literally carry the mopeds with sticks, with the crocodiles at the back of those mopeds across those rivers. And finally, after that journey, we reach our destination, the release site, where we keep the crocodiles for some time in a soft enclosure, soft release enclosure. So what this means is an area where they are going to be released, but they are not released immediately out into the river, and instead they are kept in a little enclosure where they can be acclimatized to the area, so that it is more likely that they will stick around rather than immediately go all the way to the sea potentially. So we've got crocodiles in the rivers eventually, but the next challenge for us was how to track progress. And this is a challenge that we've been thinking about recently quite a bit. We had some very encouraging anecdotal evidence that crocodiles were doing well after release. And in fact, a few years ago, we found a female that was nesting in the wild. And because of some markings in the tail, we could tell that was a female that we had released previously. So that is incredibly encouraging. But we wanted to do better than that. We wanted to have more data about what crocodiles do after we release them. And so if you look at the tail of this crocodile here, you see there's a little box, a little black box. That's a radio transmitter. And that's the first thing we tried. We tried radio tracking, but this didn't work very well. The reason for that is that this is a very remote location, and to be able to get a signal, we need to go to that location with an antenna, and obviously you can't go there very often because it is so remote. So the number of data points that we were able to obtain from that were quite limited. And also, if we were unable to find a signal, we weren't sure whether that be because the crocodile had gone farther away in any direction or because potentially the crocodile had died. So then we tried satellite tracking, and this is bulkier. We were not able to fit these transmitters onto some of the smaller crocodiles, but we have tested it with some of the larger crocodiles that we were able to release. Now, this technology is able to send data remotely, which means we don't have to go to the field. That is great. Now, the challenge we encountered was battery life was actually quite limited, and coverage was also limited under the canopy or when the crocodile is underwater. The result was we got not very much data. It was not the best solution for our purposes, especially combined with the fact that we weren't able to fit these transmitters into the smaller crocodiles that we release. And so we are now using a different technology, which is acoustic tracking. So this here is essentially a microchip that emits ultrasounds. And we insert it subcutaneously under the armpit of the crocodile. It's about the size, it's half the size of a AA battery, just for context. It doesn't really affect the crocodile. It's a very small incision. And then what we use is receivers that we place along the river. This is one of those receivers. When the crocodile with the transmitter passes by one of those receivers, the receiver will record that that particular transmitter has emitted an ultrasound nearby. And so over time, we are able to get information about where the crocodiles go because we have receivers along the river, along several kilometers upstream and downstream from the release site. This gives you an idea. So here on the map, on the left, you can see a little cross towards the bottom. That is the release site. And then the yellow squares are the acoustic receiver locations. And as you can see, we were able to see where some of the crocodiles have gone after release. And we were able to tell whether they were males or females because we had identified each of the ultrasound signals with particular crocodiles. This is an ongoing analysis that we are currently undertaking in collaboration with the University of Queensland, but it is so far provided the most useful data in terms of tracking of crocodiles post-release, which is very exciting. Now, a more basic problem that we also face, or a more basic challenge, is if we zoom out into the landscape, and in fact into Cambodia or potentially the whole range of the Siamese crocodile, this is a huge area. And this is a species that's very difficult to find in the wild. It is a very elusive size species that occurs in very low densities because it's so rare now. And so how can we know where the species occurs? If we want to understand whether certain rivers are inhabited by the Siamese crocodile, how do we go about doing this? We can do it the old-fashioned way, which is humans walking along the rivers, looking for signs, etc. And that's how we've done it in the past. It works, but it's a large amount of effort. And so we decided to try a new technology, environmental DNA. Now, environmental DNA or eDNA, basically, what this technique involves is passing water from the river or water body that we're interested in through a filter several times until the filter is full of either sediment or particles within the water. Then, once we have that filter, we send it for analysis to a lab. So we send these filters to a lab in the UK by Nature Metrics, who produce these kits, and then they are able to extract traces of DNA from the filter, and with those traces of DNA, they are able to determine the species that are present. And so, with very low effort, literally a matter of minutes, filtering water and then simply sending them for analysis to a lab, we can know what species are in that river, what fish are in the river, etc. But for us, the important question was, can we tell whether Siamese crocodiles are present or not? And that's more difficult than you might imagine because Siamese crocodiles and reptiles in general don't shed a lot of cells. And so typically they are actually not detected through this technique very well. So we had to adjust the technique by developing a specific primer for Siamese crocodiles. So after doing all that, we have tested the method of eDNA for detection of Siamese crocodiles, and we've had very positive initial results. Now, this is just a trial, and so the next steps will be to see whether it can be scaled up. But I just wanted to share some really interesting new technologies that we are beginning to use in this context. Overall, I hope you get the idea that this has been a really successful project to date, but we can, of course, not be complacent, and the species is still critically endangered. However, this year marked a record in terms of breeding in the wild. So we found the largest number of eggs and hatchlings produced in the wild for the species ever this century. And it has produced some really unusual positive news. It's not very often that you see positive news related to the status of wildlife or to conservation generally. However, we have been able, through our work over the past couple of decades, to generate, I think, some optimism in terms of what can be achieved. And this is just some examples of some of the positive stories that the project has generated. Now, as I said, we can't really be complacent, and that's for many reasons. But let's just look at population growth globally. Population is expected to continue growing, and the population in Asia is the largest in terms of regional populations, expected to be over 5 billion people by 2050 in Asia alone. Now, at the same time, economies continue to grow, and that's great if they grow sustainably, but that's not always the case. And we can see here, number 14, Cambodia. Cambodia is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. So what happens when the number of people is very large and growing, and economies are also growing? Well, often what happens is that growth is not sustainable, and it comes at a cost to the environment. And it comes at a cost because people need houses and buildings and raw materials for mobile phones, for roads, food, etc. And this is what we're seeing, an increase in environmental destruction. This is, again, a photograph from literally a few months ago in Cambodia's Cardamom Mountains. This is why the story that I've just shared about conservation of the Siamese crocodile is particularly important, in my opinion. This is not just a project to protect a species. This is a project that aims to conserve an ecosystem. The Cardamom Mountains is one of Asia's largest forests, in mainland Southeast Asia, certainly. This is a huge storage for carbon, which today is particularly relevant in the context of climate change. Also, these forests are a huge they are hugely important for a number of species and biodiversity generally, including many other threatened species. So this is, again, not just Siamese crocodiles that are benefiting from these actions. It is the entire ecosystem, and with it, all the other species that live there. And of course, we cannot forget that this biodiversity doesn't live in isolation. people live in those areas. These are indigenous Chon community people living in the Cardamom Mountains. So we have to work with these people. Not only we have to work with these people, these are the people that have been living in those areas for generations in harmony with nature. They are the ones whose livelihoods depend most directly from conserving those areas. And so I think we do have to be very careful and very mindful of the damage that is being caused, and really try our best to protect those areas for the biodiversity, but also for some of the people that live there and that depend on that nature. And as I mentioned at the beginning, actually we all do depend on those natural areas. So I'd like to also mention that this work would not have been possible without our national partners, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, and in particular the Forestry Administration, and also the many donors and supporters and organizations that are providing assistance for this work. So some of the main ones here on the screen. Also, this work would definitely not have been possible without the incredible team that's working behind the scenes. Some of them have been working on this project for years, which I think speaks to the dedication of some of these people, and of course the local communities that patrol those habitats. And as I promised at the beginning of the talk, I will now show you this video of a Siamese crocodile swimming freely in its natural habitat in the Cardamom Mountains. This is a crocodile that we release, and we were able to film using a drone. There is very limited footage of Siamese crocodiles swimming in its wild habitat, and so I hope you enjoy this little video. And finally, I'd like to just leave you with this image of Chin Kamau, who is our head community warden. He is an exceptional individual that for many years to safeguard the Siamese crocodile and the habitat of the crocodile, which includes many other species as well, out of pure dedication and respect for nature. And as Sir David Attenborough said, now is the time for action, and I think that concerns us all. Thank you very much.
That video was amazing. Thank you so much. What a great place to end. Jeff, I'm just going to bring you back so that you can do there you go. You're on the Q&A now. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Pablo. That was a great talk. We've got quite a few questions. I know we don't have a ton of time left, but we'll try and get through as many as we can. So we'll just jump right into it. Helen has asked, do you have a measure of the genetic diversity in the breeding program? Are there any concerns of a strong founder effect, if so?
We haven't yet looked at the genetic diversity. It is something that we've considered and we've discussed with some of our technical partners, the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland. We haven't been able to do it yet. But one of the reasons why it is important I think has been important to bring in the additional stock from different sources has been precisely to make sure that we are not, relying on just a couple of males, for example. And so while we don't have the genetic diversity measured, we are bringing in a considerable amount of additional breeding individuals, which should be helping increase the diversity of the crocodiles that we release.
Cool. So Ian has asked, is there a link to a site we can use to make a donation towards the costs of this very worthwhile project? Great question. And then he also asks, have you sourced any crocodiles from farms in Thailand to broaden the gene pool? Which,
Yeah, so to answer the first question, yes, the Fauna Flora website has got a page on the Siamese crocodile. I can share the link
Cool.
later if helpful, but Google Earth should do it. Fauna Flora Siamese crocodile, and I believe there's a link there. Also, feel free to get in touch. We haven't sourced crocodiles from Thailand, and that's partly because of kind of bureaucratic challenges with moving the species across borders. But there is theoretically enough crocodiles in Cambodia. We just need to protect habitats and make sure that this work continues.
Brilliant. Thanks. I think I see Padma's just dropped the link into the chat for anyone that's interested. Thank you for that. Next up from Cheryl, a question about how long can Siamese crocodiles live in the wild?
Well, that's a very good question. Actually, very little is known about their biology in the wild. Kind of a rough estimate would be 40, 50 years based on what crocodiles tend to live in captivity. But there's a lot of data we're still lacking in terms of the biology of the species in the wild. But that's a rough kind of estimate, 40, 50 years probably.
Okay. And then Cheryl's also asked, you mentioned Cuban crocodiles and the crocodile farms in Cambodia. How did they get to Cambodia? Were they smuggled?
The Cuban crocodiles. The Cuban crocodiles probably got to Cambodia through donations from Cuba. So Cambodia and Cuba used to have very strong links in the 20th century. And so I believe it was a donation from the Cuban government to the Cambodian government. And the saltwater crocodiles, I mean, they are a native species to Cambodia. It's now extinct in the wild in Cambodia, but they would have naturally occurred here.
Okay, cool. And there, Cheryl's got a few more questions, but because we've got many more, I'm going to move on and I'll come back if we've got time to the other ones. Patrick has asked, is there any evidence that Siamese crocs and saltwater crocs hybridize naturally?
There is, I believe there is some evidence that's been documented, and they may have done so in Cambodia. There is evidence that, for example, in Tonle Sap, which is Southeast Asia's largest lake, definitely there's been Siamese crocodiles there until quite recently. There were saltwater crocodiles, according to some evidence that has been found. So it is likely there would have been hybridization in the wild, and I think there is some evidence for it. Of course, the crocodiles of quite different sizes, and so Siamese crocodiles could also have been food to the larger saltwater crocodiles in some instances, but they would probably have been hybridizing to some extent in some areas.
Okay. Thank you. And then Laura has asked a question related to the eDNA work that you highlighted. Do you know how long DNA persists in the environment, and therefore how up to date the data from the eDNA, how up to date is it going to be?
So this is usually where we work is flowing water. This is rivers, and so I can give you a figure, but I believe it won't be more than a day, and so it won't be DNA from months or even weeks before. I think we are talking about probably hours or maybe a day or so, and so it's going to be quite localized. The DNA will be from the vicinity of where we are taking the sample.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I can add a little context too from some of my research. So DNA in aquatic environments falls apart really fast because of hydrolysis. We actually, for a lot of the next generation sequencing methods we use shoot water at DNA to break it up into small pieces. So in terms of these aquatic ecosystems, I agree with you, it probably degrades quite rapidly. But in terrestrial ecosystems, it's a different story at all. If it's kept relatively dry, it may persist for a long time. We know in certain dry caves, we can get very old DNA. So it depends on the environment, I think. Cool. So moving on, Anna's got a comment and a question here. Anna, thanks you for your talk, and says it's very interesting how it aligns so closely with the Orinoco Crocodile Conservation Project in Colombia, which shares a similar status and approach to the one in Cambodia. I would like to know more about the social approach you've taken to your project. Have you been working more closely with local communities, and have there been any cases of crocodile-related accidents?
Yeah, so the Siamese crocodile is really interesting in that regard. Not only local communities consider the species sacred, as I mentioned, but also there are no recorded cases of attacks to humans in the wild. And I think this is one of the reasons why this project actually has worked, especially in the modern world where we need to, have permission from government for releases. It does help when we are not releasing a species that is known to attack humans.
Great. Christina says, complimented, great talk. Can you use wildlife dogs to track the Siamese crocodiles? And then a second part, also in comparison to detected eDNA, as eDNA also detects dead individuals. I'm not sure about this, but I guess so the first one's about, can you use dogs to track the crocodiles?
Good question. I suppose you theoretically could if you train them. It's not something we've tried. But yeah, it could
It
be
sounds like there
interesting.
might be some access issues as well, based on how remote it sounds like some of the sites are.
Yeah.
Cool. So we'll try. I know we're running short on time here, but we've got a really engaged audience. So let's try and get through just a few more questions, and then we'll wrap. So Rose has asked, "What are the main predators of these crocodiles?"
Predators of the crocodiles.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, right now the humans are the main predators for the species. Natural predators in the region, tigers probably would have predated on the species. Unfortunately, the tiger is now extinct in Cambodia and across much of its range where it overlaps with the Siamese crocodile. But that's probably the only natural predator to the species when it is an adult. Now, when they're hatchlings, of course, they would have been, they would be predated by birds, potentially monitor lizards, pythons, etc.
Cool. And then just a question based on, are you optimistic for other species in decline, seeing how the crocodiles you work with are growing in number now?
I'm optimistic that we can address those declines, but I think what is important to consider is this is not going to happen unless we make an effort, because there's a lot of threats, and so we really need to work to protect habitats, and we need to work with these local communities to ensure that those habitats are protected, and what that requires, from my experience, is thinking long term. We can't be thinking about doing something for 3 years or even 5 years and expect that will stay. And we need to be working in collaboration with those communities, with the government, with those key stakeholders. There needs to be buy-in, and we need to be thinking long term.
Thanks. Sana says, thanks so much for a fascinating talk. I was wondering what made you turn your attention and research to this species and to crocodiles in general.
Well, I think crocodiles are fascinating. They are incredible prehistoric creatures that were around before the time of the dinosaurs. And I think they are beautiful and really, really interesting when you start working with them.
Excellent. And our final question for you, thank you so much for answering all of our questions. Pauline has asked, do you know what effect the project will have on the food chain, it being a top predator?
Not in great detail, but I think it's well documented generally that when you have a top predator in the ecosystem, that ecosystem is generally healthier and more balanced, and that translates into a kind of healthier trophic chain and better outcomes for some of the levels below. And so while we don't have very concrete evidence, certainly not in this case, it'd be safe, I think, to assume that having the Siamese crocodile back would translate into a healthier ecosystem more generally for other species as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much again, Pablo, for a really interesting talk. And that was a really exciting question and answer session. And I think we all learned a lot. So everyone, thank you for attending today, and we hope to see you at, I guess as Padma said, this is the last one for this year, but next year we hope to see you. So I hope everyone has a happy new year, and we'll see you soon.